Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see y'all showed up today. I don't know how many of you are in here right now. Um, this book is really fascinating. This is the cover of it. And it was published in 1913. And the way I came across this was a very kind subscriber who watches my stuff thought I might find it interesting. And in and of itself, it's interesting because of the topics. The hypnotism, mesmerism, and psychology are all grouped together, but it's the secret of clairvoyance. And for those of you who might want to put this in some historical context, what was happening in the US in 1913 when this book was published? Well, that's the year they passed the constitutional amendment to create the IRS, and they created the Federal Reserve. I think it was maybe it was Minnesota, but one of the states formed the first minimum wage for workers. Before then, in the year of 1913 itself, over 25,000 workers died on the job because work situations were so unsafe, and over 700,000 were injured. And that meant seriously injured enough for it to be noted, not just that they sprained an ankle or stuff, but they were impaired. Um, what was happening in our world? Well, what was sort of making them look to publish this? Well, the spiritualism that had started, spiritualism really got a big kickoff during the Civil War. And it's because families didn't want to um, give up on their lost loved ones because, it used to be before the Civil War, you died near home. Your family all knew you died. They were all part of it, and you went on. In the Civil War, so many people were killed far away from their homes that it really upset people, and they wanted to get attached back to them. The same phenomena was happening in Britain, and the spiritualism and the Golden Dawn and the Hermetic Order and all those stuff were really going big in England too. And they had a lot of clairvoyant, they had a lot of spiritualists. And um, during all that mush of time, a guy, the other thing, okay, I'm going to finish out what's happening in the world. 1913 was also a year that Europe was practicing for World War One. That's when the Balkan War started between Greece and another country, and they invaded Bulgaria, and it just started that whole mess going off, and the Ottoman Empire was falling apart, which had kind of helped a lot of the area around the Mediterranean stay stable. And so it was a very much like now, a lot of upheaval, a lot of people wondering, why am I here? Where does this go to? Now, if you notice in the title of the book, it says hypnosis, mesmerism, and psychology. And I've heard the term that someone would be mesmerized by someone and what would happen with that. But in reading this book and then researching it, mesmerism became popular. And don't try to say that word fast, it really screws up. In the late 18th century, Franz Anton Mesmer claimed to be able to cure people through animal magnetism and real magnetism. He was really using magnets on their body. His procedure involved applying magnets to the patient's body, gazing into their eyes, and making magnetic passes over them with his hands. Variants of mesmerism remained popular through the 19th century when they gradually were replaced by hypnosis. And hypnosis uses a lot, if you're using verbal hypnosis, it uses a lot of the same concept as mesmerism, and I'll explain that. But mesmerism is different from hypnosis because hypnosis only uses words and verbal suggestions, and to primary and nonverbal suggestions, in other words, images, they try to plant images in your mind. Mesmerism required working with the life force chi the prana to induce a trance. So it's kind of a late 1800s, early 1900s Reiki. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the way hypnosis works is it focuses your attention, reduces the peripheral attention, so it makes you have be focused on where you are to move forward. And um, they were competing um, theories of each other in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's a kind of hypnosis where they use you've seen the old swinging the watch and doing that stuff. Um, there's also a way of using, and this where mesmerism, if you read some of the early texts on mesmerism, that doesn't involve magnets and that stuff. They both kind of start with the same theory. You begin a conversation with someone and you focus on them. And then you bring in a lot of, it can be third party quotes where you quote people from different texts, or you can start by saying, I was in a conversation just the other day with my brother's brother in law, and he was telling me that his daughter and a friend had gone to this place. And you somehow wind the conversation. You've got, like, there's all these other people who are involved in the thought you're going to. And then you get them focused. And when you can tell a person is really focused on what you're saying, they tell you to actually lower your voice, which a lot of you will understand this if you watch political ads. They'll start out with some declarative statement, then they'll have some whispering voice saying, is this what you really want? And they try to convince you to see the reality that they're looking at, that they have now framed. There's a whole bunch of other people out here who believe this. Now I'm bringing you over to focus you on it. And then when you get a person to a point that you think they can be directed, you give them a command. You must do this or you must do that. Normally, in personal mesmerism or hypnosis, they do it with a quiet voice. And one of the things about hypnosis currently is they're supposed to have your permission to do this. Mesmerism, imagine if somebody starts attaching magnets to you, you already got your permission to do that. But there are 3 steps. Redirect the person's attention to the solution with either another stating of the problem, or stating how other people see the problem, or trying to reframe how they're seeing the problem. Then you offer them options, and then you kind of watch how the subject responds. And then at the point you feel you have them kind of hooked into your theory and what you're talking about, that's when you plant them your intention. That's when you give them, some people call it the command. That sounds like a rather direct word, but yeah, Debbie Joyce said this is good. I was taught to say the ABCs because that puts it back in your realm and your control. And conversational hypnosis uses language patterns, and metaphors are really important when people are trying to work with you in hypnosis. And then the other thing they'll do, and boy, does this explain some politicians we listen to or don't listen to, actually turn off. They speak in never-ending sentences. They just go on and on and on and on and on and don't get you anywhere until you're kind of almost worn down and you're willing to accept anything. But it can also be very good if you're the sort of person who has trouble turning your mind off at night for being talked into meditations or talked into sleep. And usually any of the ones I listen to people before I turn them on and try to go to sleep, because I want to know where it goes all the way to the end. And a lot of them, they say they're 2.5 hours long. They're like 30 minutes long, and then they fade slowly away, and you just get the music and the sounds they've established to hold your mind's attention. But what does it say? What are they trying to do with you in in 1913? And it starts with a word of warning, and this is something we've been talking. I thought it was kind of funny when I read it because it sounded like stuff we've been talking about. It's where it starts. Reader, if you have undertaken the study of this, the most sublime and useful of all sciences, in order to gratify your own selfish desires, if you intend to use this information given to you for your own interests alone and to the detriment of your fellow men, and everything in here is men. I forgot because I've gotten used to, I guess, a more politically, what people used to call politically correct, but gender neutral sort of stuff. But anything, your fellow men, let us earnestly entreat you, for the good of others and for your own peace of mind in this world and the next, to close this book when you finish this sentence. What that's saying, if you're going to study this just to manipulate people for your own good, stop here. And the reason they want you to stop is, and either commit this book to the flames or give it to one who has purer motives and more benevolent designs. We are placing in your hands the most potent agency for good and evil. Used for proper purposes with clear appreciation of what you owe yourself and to others, it will cause thousands to rise up and call you blessed. They're promising a lot. But if, on the other hand, you think of this only for yourself, take advantage of the ignorance of the multitude and to try to be dishonest in many purposes to attain great power, which is placed at your command in language, I cannot describe the punishment that you will deserve, and it will be surely follow. These guys don't write short sentences. It will surely follow that if you follow that course. And then it says, it's not for us to point out the direful consequences of abuse, but we will only say that your responsibility is how you use this information. I shortened that sentence considerably. And then they talk about how philosophers have reasoned and physicians know, and materialists will repeat, you can only find it in the material world. And they slowly walk you towards different books and things I'd never heard of. There's a Dr. Clark's magazine, Hours at Home, and he's talking about sleepwalkers and how they need to be handled. I mean, they put everything that they couldn't figure out where else it belonged. It's in this book. And they talk about how if you become blind, which was the thing that used to happen a lot, because there are a lot of stuff around them that hurt them, how all these other senses would pop up. And if you develop this extra psychic sense, this clairvoyance, which is not a word they use. They use the other words a lot. They use hypnotism, mesmerism, and psychology. And they talk about basically the things we do. But you need to protect yourself. You need to use it for good. This era is a long way from the light at the end of the tunnel, let me tell you. These guys are not sure that the light's at the end of the tunnel. The different chapters they have are historical sketches of things that they report from history where people have used these powers. And they actually talk to astronomers. They don't talk, there's no astrologers that I found in here so far. But the chapters are historical sketches, how to produce the psychologic, mesmeric, and clairvoyant conditions. They literally have a 9-page chapter on how to set up the room, how to get information, energy need around it. Remarks on classifications of mesmeric phenomena, and that's when they go into all the different kinds of phenomena they can create with this, which sounds a whole lot like things you can find in meditative states. But the specific directions for producing mesmeric state, attractions towards the mesmeric, clairvoyant perceptions, and then they go into when you start having your own clairvoyant uh, things. They talk about application of the mesmerism, and then the last chapter, which is like 5 pages long, is how to be a spirit medium, or rules that will be observed if you form formal circles. And this is their rules: how to be a spirit medium, which we can relate to more. The spirit circle is the assembling together of given numbers of persons for the purpose of seeking communication with spirits. And the first condition to be observed is the persons, when you compose the circle, they must be, as far as possible, of opposite temperaments. They don't want everybody all feeling the same way. They want, and they want you to be in a place where you won't be interrupted. Duh. Do not, once you set your circle time up, for those of you who are latecomers, you will never make it in this world. They don't want any latecomers coming in. And it says you cannot run these for more than 2 hours. I don't know what happens at 2 hours and 5 minutes. I don't think I want to know. It said seances can extend to 1 hour, but if you've absolutely obtained nothing, then they say to close down the camp. And it says that the circle becomes powerful after 6 sittings. A well-tested medium that you have faith in is a good place to start. Just to try to go into this cold. But someone had to go into it cold because not everybody knew how to find a medium. And then they also have a way that you can put out metal objects to detect magnetism, because they thought electrical energy and magnetism would come in with you. And it said the impressions will be of voices of the spirits most frequently. But some people, if they're strong, can learn to write, speak, sing, dance, gesticulate, and literally become a totally encompassed channel. And it says they're never perfect. They try to do what's perfect, but they can't make it to what's perfect. They do the best they can with the body they got. And it said, strive in truth and rebuke error gently. Do not always. What they're saying is the spirits might tell you something and you're going, that's not right. But the reason they're saying it is because they're spirits and they don't know. And they're in a different place. And then when you clean up the room, they have a way of setting out magnets in this room, and they want you to move those magnets around so it can shift the energy. And it says all persons are subject to influence from spirit. So, and I tell you guys, I'm going to go more into depth about, they have things on how to get ready for surgery, how to use it for medicinal purposes only. And those are all things that have to do with mesmerism. But in exploring this book, and it's interesting from our point of view, because when you read in here, you read about how the men of science. It's always the men of science and the men of religion. I mean, everything, everybody that's put into any position of power in this is a man. And they don't say it, but they kind of imply you need to have men in all of these. And I'm not against men being there if they want to be there, but they're just saying you got to have it. But on the inside, as fascinating as this book is, on the inside cover and on the back covers, these are all other books that they made. And they do everything from Book of Conundrums, there's 596, not 596, snappy jokes. Well, it's before TV, so they couldn't hit up Stephen Colbert for a snazzy line. Peachy jokes, I have no idea what those are about. There's also some incredibly racist stuff, which I won't even say. But there's sketches and etiquette. And anyway, I took a picture of some of those, and I'm going to throw them up on the screen so we can talk about. But this is what we study was classed with. You can get this for 30 cents, get this whole book, tell you everything you ever wanted to know, and more about hypnosis. But this is one, fortune telling with cards, dice, and dominoes. And that fascinated me because I'd never heard anyone say you could use dominoes to do fortune telling. And I was thinking about it, and I think it might be one of the things they used in numerology. And dice would be the same way. Well, dice could be like the Chinese thing of throwing the coins. It could be like that. But I thought that was kind of interesting. They have another one, Herman and the Black Arts. Now, this is a guy, and even on the book you can't read what he's doing, but he's doing it in something that looks a whole lot like a crystal ball. And then I would love to read this, the new book of etiquette and politeness. And I'm sure that at this time there was an emerging middle class, not like what happened in the 50s, but there were shopkeepers and there were more different. Not everybody worked in the factories, although the cities were growing and getting big. But everybody wanted to be polite and nice. They were coming out of the Victorian era, and that's what the flappers were breaking away from, this guys. So I'm pretty sure if I read the new book of etiquette and politeness, it would remind me a whole lot of the old book of politeness that my mother taught me from. Oh, and this one's got to be a hoot. The Mystery of Love, Courtship, and Marriage. And it says explained. That says explained. It's hard to read. For all of 30 cents, you could find out all about the art of courtship. And the last one I pulled out of the sections is Old Gypsy Nan's, and I like it because her name was Nan, fortune teller. And what it is really a book of dream interpretations. And she looks like a gypsy. And yeah, they talk about energy, but they talk about it in a different way, which kind of intrigued me. And I read through it before. I've been reading it for the last 3 weeks. This is the tiniest damn type. And it says it was a community where people needed to acknowledge that thoughts and movements and your actions made a difference. And the clairvoyant perception. And they kind of treat clairvoyance like you can't be made, you are. These books were published, Angela, in 1913 in New York City. And the company had been around since the 1890s. And actually, as far as when I was researching it, this set of books was some of the last stuff they published. But you can still find them on the internet. I was trying to trying to get information about him, and I kept finding rare booksellers. This is considered a rare book. One of the things they talked about, which kind of amazed me, because I didn't know how much they knew about chakras, but they said whenever you're working with this stuff, when you're like doing your hypnosis and you go into your quieter voice and you're drawing the person in with that speech, to gear your voice from your solar plexus. And so they do talk about body energies, but clairvoyant perception. We've almost concluded to the call of the facility of the clairvoyant vision, but there's a question. If the sensations that are conveyed to the mind by any other source other than the optic nerve, it has proprietary vision over your vision. Besides, there may be knowledge of things and occurrence obtained apparently in this same facility, which cannot well be classed as phenomena of vision. In other words, they're saying when we see visions, saying we see visions isn't the best way because they can't figure out where it is. We therefore consider, under the generic term and perceptions, that such visions are clairvoyant. In other words, you're seeing it with your mind. And he claims he can mesmerize people to make them expand their powers of perception. And it says it's not unconsciousness, it's having the limited ability to see and touch and feel these things. And the perfect state of clairvoyance is attained when the person is in the room with you, they're aware of everything that's happening around them. But there's no length of time on when someone can be put into a clairvoyant state. And they said in a lot of cultures, clairvoyance is called sight because it is what comes through the mind, through the eyes. And it also, he talks about how you have to build up to it because you get weary when you're doing clairvoyance. But anyway, that's my funky book. If people have questions, you can ask them. I would ask everybody who's in the chat today and watching the show, please go check your subscriptions. YouTube's doing its, that person's really not subscribed anymore. So I would like you to check your subscriptions because I lost a few last week and I can't figure out why. And if you have questions, you can type them into the comments. And if you don't have any questions, okay. Hi, Gigi. And Angla's here. And people are saying their mothers were born in 1914. My mother's born in 1918. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because she was younger than the Queen. And my parents were born in Canada, so everybody always ranks themselves against royalty. I think I'm gonna. Hi, Voices from the Swamp. Glad to see you here. This has been it's been a strange time. I've been talking to a lot of people that are feeling very much like, what path am I on? And, which way am I going to go? Yeah, this one's true. Not Hi, Gigi Lord. They did manage to get through the pandemic. Okay. When did I start in this work? Does it run in my family? I was just born this way, and I did not belong. Unfortunately, I didn't belong. I know some readers who had families that were into the metaphysical world and were raised around it. I was raised around a very strict Wesleyan church, and the Presbyterians. And I lived in a town that had half the town was Catholic. So you couldn't grow up there without ending up being some kind of sort of almost Catholic just because it rubs off on you. And my mom, she didn't condemn me for it. She didn't encourage it. When the way I found tarot cards was at a slumber party when I was a kid. And we'd all be sitting there and we'd start playing with them. Thank God we didn't have Ouija boards from what I hear about Ouija boards. But and that may just be a rumor, but I've never used one. And we'd read cards, and I'd read everybody's cards. And you're all friends, you're all classmates. I was at these slumber parties with the kids I'd gone to kindergarten with. I was like in the 5th grade. And everybody kept saying, no, you read it, no, you read it. And eventually we figured out that, and I was reading it the same way they were. I was laying the cards out in a Celtic cross. And then I was reading with the little book, the little white book. It was a Rider-Waite deck. And, I just, I just read the things and it all came together. Of course, I'm a good storyteller, so that helps. But eventually, it wasn't actually so much my friends, because they could always figure out a reason why I would know what was going on around them. But it was their teenage sisters. I'm a boomer, and everybody came from a family. I lived in a family of 5, and we were one of the smallest families in the neighborhood. And I'd be sitting there doing my thing with them. And the teenage sisters were the ones that noticed at first that what I was saying was of interest to them. Of course, there are also teenage girls who were wildly in love. And I remember one time this girl came to me and she said at the slumber party before she and the older sisters were going to go leave us, little kids alone. And she said, where's Tony? How's Tony doing tonight? And I, being a little innocent little grade school kid, I said, oh, he's out with that nice blonde-haired lady. Well, the girl asking about Tony had dark hair, and she wasn't too pleased with that answer. And I found out later from her little sister, she said, how'd you know that? My sister went out and found out he was out dating around on her with this other girl. And so I started to pay attention, and people started to pay attention to me. And through my teenage years, things would just be put in front of me. Learn this. I learned astrology from reading like little astrology magazines you could pick up at the dime store. And, I just didn't think much of it. But the question of it, does it run in my family? Absolutely, definitely it does. My mother, who ran away from her farm in Canada and went and lived with her uncle, who was the chaplain at a university in Ontario where she was. And she was 15, and she tested in and she got in the nursing school. So she was a graduated 4-year trained RN by the time she was 19. And she worked in the wards, and she told me she could tell who was and who wasn't going to make it. She told me that later, not when I was a kid, but much later. But she also, unfortunately, for my best friend when I was growing up, who had been a friend of mine since we were in kindergarten, her mother was one of those women during World War II that flew airplanes around and did missions that were behind the lines, so they didn't have to waste male pilots on doing just the sort of routine work. And when when the war ended and she came back and lived in my hometown, we had a small little puddle jumper airport in my county, and she flew small planes, and she flew gliders, and she had a hot air balloon license. Doris had everything. And Doris was a pilot that you could hire if you're just going short hops across the Midwest. And she was flying, it was the summer of 1966, and there was an airline strike. There was a Patco strike. So the big airlines weren't flying. So if you were the guy who was in her plane happened to be a guy named Champaign, Tony Lima, and he needed a flight from the Chicago area to somewhere in Indiana to go to a golf tournament. And so he hired her, and it was a Sunday, and something went wrong with the plane, and she knew it was going to land. And the way the trajectory they were on, they figured she had a choice between landing on a playground that had kids in it, and what she chose to do is she flipped the plane and killed them all. She died in that plane crash. My best friend's mother died in a plane crash. Well, I didn't know till I was in my 50s. I went and met with my old friend, and she said, you know, your mom took me aside when this was like our junior year in high school. Bucky used to come to my house because my mom smoked, and my mom said, telling that kid not to smoke is not going to stop her from smoking. And both of her parents were recovered smokers, so smoke was not allowed in their house. So my mom used to let her smoke at our house. And Bucky was over, and she was outside smoking with my mom. And my mom said, you need to get to know your mom. And Bucky thought, well, that's the weirdest conversation starter I've had in my life. And she said, well, and my mom said, well, you're one of 4 kids, and your mom flies and she works, she does her good stuff. It's like I do my charity things. So you need to just tell your mom you just want to go have a dinner with her. So Bucky said she got her courage up. She went to talk to Doris, and they went out and had dinner, and she found out all kinds of stuff she never knew about her mother. Her mother had a degree in home ec, and her mother could look at a dress in a store window and come home and draw the patterns and make it. And her mother was just incredibly brilliant. And Bucky, because of those dinners, Bucky had decided, they went out 3 times. Her mother had already signed her up to the beginning pilot school. And then Bucky went off to work at summer camp, and her mother went off to do her thing. And that was that summer. And Bucky said, I've never talked to anybody about it. How did your mom know I needed to talk to my mother? Because it ended up, I don't know. I know there's a lot of people in here who are boomers. Our parents didn't tell us much about how they were raised, because they were raised in the middle of the Depression. And it was either a wonderful, glorious time that you heard all about, or it was really miserable and difficult. And you almost ended up in an orphanage like my father did. He didn't end up in the orphanage. He got rescued by an uncle. But there was just all kinds of despair and hideous stories. And I think they wanted us to have a cheery life after they'd been through their youth in World War II. They just wanted to have a good life. And Bucky's mom told her about a lot of the struggles of growing up on a dirt farm in Iowa and not having enough to eat and everything. And Bucky said, I never would have known that if your mom hadn't pushed me to go have those dinners. And she said, and by this time, Bucky knew I was always kind of psychic, but we didn't talk about it that way. But by this time, we formally talked about it that way. And she said, was your mom like you? Did she make you like it? And I said, no, my mom absolutely discouraged it. And so when I asked my mom later about what was the deal with Bucky, and she said, unfortunately, I can see death. When people are around me, I can see about 6 months before I had a feeling, and I know they're going to die. I am so grateful that of all the gifts you can get from the heavens, that's not the one I got. And she said, I just really felt compelled to tell her. And so I told my mom. She actually got a chance to really find out. When Doris died, Bucky sat down with her siblings, the other 3. They knew nothing about what their mother had been through growing up. So, yeah, it did run in my family, and it's in my kids. Each one of them has the gift in a very different way that they work with. And some of them will work with it more as they get older. My son, when I was in politics, it was really hard. My mom was a Methodist and changed to Presby due to my dad's family choice. She was a Northern Irish immigrant family, but they still hated Catholics. My mother was an Episcopalian. And yeah, my mom was not wild about wearing the green and honoring the Catholicism of Irishness that was so worshipped when I was a kid. But on St. Patrick's Day, she'd put a a shamrock on me and stuff. And she told me, but remember, you're really an orangeman, which was meaningless to me because I didn't know what orange meant. I found out later. I tell you what, you go back far enough, Catholic, orange, we're all Celtic, and okay, I'm going to try to figure this one out. I have a sibling who has something. I don't know how much they pay attention to it, but it's like 3 times they've mentioned something and it's just not normal. Well, we're normal because it's how we are. And I just, you just have to accept it. It's who you are. And it gets much easier and much less weighty if you finally accept it. And yeah, my dad didn't realize his past life as a Tibetan monk. Probably didn't. One of my younger brothers, an astrologer, when I was learning to do charts, I did all my siblings. She looked at his chart and she said, oh, he's been a healer in so many lifetimes. And she said, he won't stay in the field of medicine he's in. And I said, well, he trained all those years to be an anesthesiologist and he really seems to like it. But it ends up he really didn't. And his blood pressure got so out of control, he had to quit practicing medicine. And it's because he was a real healer and he could put his hands on people before they were going into surgery and he'd know they weren't really fixing the right thing. Yeah, and there are a lot of parents that don't speak about their family life. Most of what I know about my mother's family life, I put together by doing ancestry and then talking to relatives in Canada. There's a big giant shady. I don't know why that happened in the middle of her life. And that's lovely. Yeah, maybe this is my homage to go tell you to go talk to your relatives. And I'm glad you like to hear me talk all day because nobody's asking questions, so I'm going to have to do. Actually, not too much longer. I'm going to dig more deeply into this book. I'm going to try and see how it relates to what we know now. I've been doing a little more history. The same year as this book came out, 1913, that's when Rider-Waite did its first big volume of how to read cards. It was a leather-bound volume. I've seen one. They're gorgeous. And it was the first real explanation of that. And it was because of that, the time that came out and when it hit, that it became the sort of standard of tarot cards because it had so much more literature and stuff around it. And anyway, my mom and I had the same birth month. She was born May 11th. I was born May 2nd. My dad was born May 10th. 2 Taurus parents trying to raise a Taurus child. And their charts, they're both earth bound. And I'm Taurus Scorpio, so that didn't work out well. Okay, Cynthia, this is an interesting idea. I taught a tarot class. I taught 3 of them, and I'm about to start another one, but I'm going to wait till the retrograde goes away. And they meet. One of the women, Amy, took it upon herself to get a Zoom thing and create a circle, and they meet every Thursday evening, and they all read cards, and they've got their own little system set out. And I went and visited them last Thursday. I said, I'm going to drop in. And it was really fun. And they've had some interesting experiences. And how do you find a psychic group? I don't know. Maybe Terry and I, holding your space, are talking about that all the time. Maybe I can figure out a way to work one out. I do an Oracle Garden class. And as my class will tell you, it's more chit-chat among the girls than, we work with the Oracle Garden, but it's more chit-chat among the girls. But they really read the cards. And one of them keeps a log of everything they're seeing. And that's really important for people to write down what's going on. But they had a week where at the end, they all ask a question. It's like something like, what's going on in the collective this week? How's this going to work? And they all got the Tower and Death and the Three of Swords and the Five of Cups, and just an incredibly grieving event. They said when they woke up the next morning, they found out that Navalny had been killed in the prison. And they said, that sort of struck them. And they said, is that what it's like when you're reading with another reader and you get the same messages? And I said, yeah. And we get the same messages to a different degree. But that's the other thing. So I'm going to put a pin in that one. Cynthia, let's see if it's in my banners. Yeah, this is how you can reach me. If you'd like, so I can get your email, so I can have a way to keep track of you. And so I can figure out a way. I really want to find a way for people to work in psychic groups. Because that's when you learn that it works. And the only way I learned to read cards was people kept asking me to read cards. And I actually can now look back. Well, if the first one I really read well was when I was 12, and I'll be 75 in 3 weeks. That's 60, 62, 63 years. I have that many years of reading and remembering. And every once in a while, I'll be sitting going through something. I go, oh, I remember. I read about that. And you start to build your own log. The other way you can do it is create a calendar for yourself and just write for yourself once a day, whether it's a word, whether it's a card, whatever it is, but just focus on that one thing. And so, as Dorothy Morgan constantly says, that gives you a good place to go back and look. When astrologers are saying, remember in 1988, where were you on this date? And it'll help you kind of see where you are and how your energies balance out. Oh, that's an interesting story. My great-great-aunt's baby was kidnapped in the Indian Territory in the 1903-ish. Daughter was found around 1933 with the advent of radio. Messages from psychics and mediums for years that they would find each other, and they did. That's a cool story. And well, Jen, I don't know if you're interested in a class, but I teach a really good class, and according to this lady, they really did learn how to read. Yeah, Mary's in my Oracle group, and she's had a lot of changes in her life, and she really needs to have a lot of settling down. She's falling into a difficult political time. Oh, I'm glad you reminded me of that. And that's a good one. Find another reader and sit down and read further. Let's see. One of the things I was going to talk about is I was before the election, and this is political, so yeah, if y'all don't want to hear political stuff, you can turn it off now. In 2016, I was reading in a vintage clothing store, and people knew I was involved with politics. They knew I'd worked in Obama's campaign. I actually had a place where you could sign up to vote. I registered voters there, and I explained to people what to do when you go to the polling place and what you need. And I kept telling people, don't say his name. Don't even give, it's like the ancient Egyptian thing. If you've ever seen any of the archaeologists always say, they put their name all over everything, because as long as their name was alive, they are alive. And I think there's a lot of the same energy about people. You know, when I go out to dinner with friends and they want to talk about their old boyfriends, I said, let's not discuss him. And it would take a little programming, but they'd finally get them out of their mind. And the same thing I felt about what happened in 2016. And they said, oh, but he's not going to win, but he's da da da. And they'd go into his next outrageous thing. They'd focus on him. Don't focus on them. Focus on what is going right. And then once he got in and everybody was appalled at what he was doing, Mueller was going to save us. The Mueller report was going to prove what a crook he was. And that was going to be the end of that. And don't put your eggs in one basket. I don't care if it's a reader. I don't care what it is. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't religiously follow one person. Some person throws up, I'm going to go live. I'm going to talk about Iran and Israel. And Scott and I really didn't want to read about it on Sunday because it was too new. The energies hadn't flowed out and made sense yet. So there's two things with the news that's going on now. And now that stupid, it's not, I'm glad the trial is going on in New York. And I know we can't dismiss it like a normal trial because of what's involved. But don't put all your hopes and your emotions into Alvin Bragg or anybody else there. Put it into the universe and have the universe decide the outcome. When we focus on, it's like, that's why I hope it helps with Jack Smith's stuff, because, he's one man, but we can tell the universe that we want to be able to feel power or build power around him or bless him with power or bless him with light. But last night I talked to an old friend of mine. She's one of the best readers I've ever known. She has not read cards in a gazillion years. She just opened a vintage booth up in Colorado, up in Denver. And I'll get the name of her fair where she's at so you can go visit her. And she's going to start reading next weekend. She decided she's going to read cards after looking at the crowds. She's already made in the first weekend her booth rent for the next month, which is really good because she's a completely new booth. She's a really interesting lady, but she and I were talking last night, and we were talking about, she said, I've been thinking horrible things, like I just wish this person would just go away. And she said, and the only way I know in my head at the end of it, it's like they'll just die. And she said, and I know we can't wish death on anybody. So she and I talked each other off that ledge. But it's a hell of a Mercury retrograde. It's a hell of a lot of us waking up to stuff. And oh, good. You found Mary McSorley has one of my gardens, and she's moving everything around her house and she lost it. It's okay. You just need to work with it right then. And Voices from the Swamp. Voices from the Swamp said this was also part of her family history. I missed it. I'm sorry. I should have marked it. Oh, Sherry. Okay, here. All the women in my family have the gift. That's how it was said. My mom would have visions of someone's death. She hated it. And that's not one I'd want either. My grandmother and I just know stuff. I grew up with it, but I ignored it. But then eventually you just can't. You'll ignore it to your peril. You'll have to come to terms with it. And oops. That sounds like a miserable way to go, being marched over by a marching band. And yeah, my family, they called it the knowing too. And well, that's why I'd like to create some kind of forum where people could just come together and read and not be in competition with each other. I don't understand. When I was at psychic fairs, there were people who would put that up, and this was the 70s and 80s. And you're not in competition with each other. And who got it? Yeah. Oh, that's kind of cute. Mueller was a distraction. Garland was a scout, and Jack is a marksman. Well, let's hope Jack hits a few bullseye. Okay. Yeah. I don't mind. I mean, if people like politics and it really doesn't bother them. But Scott and I were talking after the thing on Sunday, and we're so glad we decided to not dwell on war. He's a veteran. He never was in a shooting part of a war, but he's been in the military. I was not in the military. I lost friends in Vietnam, and I grew up around kids whose parents had been scarred by World War II or the Korean War. And I just don't want to deal with it. Oh, yeah, I don't do downloads when I'm driving. I usually do downloads in the middle of the night when I really want to sleep. And you weren't, if you never got encouraged to learn about it, Jen, you just weren't encouraged, but you're in charge of you now, right? I presume you're a grown ass adult since you're watching my thing. It's up to you. It's like my kids, my daughter just learned how to read tarot by hanging out with me, and she got in all kinds of trouble. And she went to school at a public school, but it had a lot of, well, I'm in Dallas. It had a lot of very religious students. They surrounded her locker one day and were praying for her. And she sort of said, go hang around the flagpole and pray there. The country needs more help than I do. Well, I have to go too. Have a blessed day and a beautiful evening. And I understand the weather's warming up around the country, so which is good. And like I said, keep watch out. I'm going to be posting when I'm going to be doing my tarot class again. But I'm not even going to talk to Dorothy Morgan's going to help me pick the electional date to announce it, but I'm not even going to talk to her till this Mercury retrograde. Yesterday, it made my entire computer go black and none of my passwords work for about an hour. I was losing it completely. But don't let those, I mean, trust me, yesterday was not a day to be around me. But what we each need to do is kind of go through these times with so much change, not focus on the people we don't need to be focused on. Good shows if you want to watch good enlightening shows and see people making fun deals, and especially if you can understand British accents. There's a show that I just found called The Bidding Room. It's on YouTube. It's on BBC, and people bring items in that are part of their family life or their personal history or whatever. And there's five people that own vintage places, and they bid on it. It's fascinating to hear the stories about all those things. The other one that I've loved for years is called The Repair Shop, and they've just put season 9 from Britain on YouTube. And you just sit there. These people work so collegial together, and they're fixing. I mean, you see them turn things, what are vintage antiques that are all toys from my youth. I mean, it's not just toys, it's musical instruments. It's, old fireman helmets from the time in England when they had the brass ones. I mean, just really, really fascinating things. And the stories you hear about the people attached to them, that's interesting. And I think and there's another show called Abode. And the only thing that bothers me about Abode is they're looking at trying to save great country houses in England. And there are these people who've lived in them for 42 generations, right? And they're on like bazillion acres of ground, and these people show up and they say, look, you need to do more than have your friends who want to come here for hunting weekends. You've got all this land, you can do all these different things. And you see these people going, well, I want to save my house, but I don't want anyone in it. And you're like, what's wrong with you? I mean, one guy was literally, his son wanted to come in and start running it as an events venue, which the parents never wanted to do. And the father wouldn't take it off the market. So he couldn't plan someone's wedding 9 months from now if the house might be sold. I mean, you see these people doing all these snotty things, but the homes are beautiful and the countryside is beautiful. And when they run into There was a fun lady who had acquired the house and just really had to fix it up. It was in Wales, and she'd fixed it up until her partner, they split, and she was barely keeping it going. And the guy showed up and said, you can do this and this, and you can make between 80 and 100,000 pounds a year and keep the place and get it fixed. And she jumped right in. So it's a real look at the human soul. And I love old houses. So anyway, that's a minute. That's more than a minute. I'm a minute over. Y'all take care. Bye.